When someone breaks your trust, your brain processes the experience not just as an emotional disappointment, but as a physical threat. Neurobiological studies reveal that betrayal activates the exact same neural pathways as physical pain, specifically within the anterior cingulate cortex. This is why a sudden breach of trust feels like a physical punch to the gut. Human beings depend on trust as an evolutionary survival mechanism. Thousands of years ago, relying on your group meant staying alive, while unexpected betrayal often meant exile or death. Because of this deep-rooted wiring, your brain views trust as a fundamental mental blueprint for safety. When that blueprint shatters, your mind loses its predictive baseline, leaving you feeling completely disoriented and unsafe in your environment. The invisible damage: how the brain reacts. Trust is essentially your brain's ability to predict another person's future behavior based on past patterns. When someone close to you breaks that trust, your brain's predictive system experiences a catastrophic failure. Instantly, the amygdala, the alarm center of your brain, goes into hyperdrive, releasing a flood of cortisol and adrenaline. You suddenly shift from a state of calm social connection into a state of hypervigilance. You begin replaying every past interaction with that person, questioning what was real and what was a lie. This psychological phenomenon is known as when is when is where was when is Your mind is forced to rewrite the history of your relationship in real time, which consumes massive amounts of mental energy and causes severe emotional fatigue. The 3 stages of betrayal processing. The human mind processes broken trust through 3 distinct psychological phases. The first phase is acute shock and denial. During this stage, your brain attempts to protect itself from the overwhelming reality of the situation. You might feel numb, detached, or unable to fully process the information. This is a temporary defense mechanism designed to prevent psychological overload. The second phase is hypervigilance and obsessive rumination. Once the shock wears off, your brain tries to regain control by analyzing every single detail. You find yourself obsessing over text messages, past conversations, and subtle clues you think you missed. Your brain believes that if it can figure out why and how it happened, it can prevent it from ever happening again. The third phase is relational identity crisis. This is where the damage reaches your self-perception. You stop asking, "Why did they do this?" and start asking, "What is wrong with me?" Or, "How could I be so blind?" Broken trust directly undermines your self-confidence because it makes you doubt your own judgment and intuition. The illusion of the small lie. Many people believe that big betrayals, like severe dishonesty or infidelity, are the only things that destroy relationships. However, psychological research shows that trust is actually eroded far more frequently by micro-betrayals. A micro-betrayal occurs when someone consistently breaks small promises, dismisses your feelings, hides minor details, or chooses convenience over loyalty. When these small incidents accumulate over time, they weaken the psychological foundation of the relationship. When a major betrayal eventually happens, it isn't a sudden event. It is simply the final collapse of a structure that was already hollowed out from the inside. The neurological barrier to rebuilding. Once trust is broken, rebuilding it requires far more effort than building it the first time. This happens because of a chemical shift in the brain. In a trusting relationship, social interactions trigger the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. Oxytocin suppresses fear and promotes feelings of warmth and safety. However, after a betrayal, future interactions with that same person no longer trigger oxytocin. Instead, they trigger dopamine-driven threat responses and stress hormones. Even if the person who hurt you shows genuine remorse and changes their behavior, your brain will continue to flag them as a potential source of danger for a prolonged period. Healing requires overriding your brain's natural survival instincts. Trust breaks. The emotional injury is often compounded by a psychological phenomenon known as gaslighting. Gaslighting occurs when the person who breached your trust actively manipulates the narrative to make you question your own memory, perception, or sanity. Psychologically, this forces the victim into a state of severe cognitive dissonance, holding 2 conflicting beliefs at once. I know what I experienced, and the person I trust is telling me I'm wrong. This psychological tug-of-war weakens your internal locus of control. Instead of focusing on the betrayal itself, your mental bandwidth is entirely consumed by self-doubt. You begin to second-guess your instincts, audit your own emotional reactions, and rely on the person who hurt you to define what is real. Over time, this erodes your foundational self-trust, making recovery significantly harder. Betrayal trauma and attachment theory. To understand why broken trust hits some people harder than others, we have to look at attachment theory. Developed by psychologist John Bowlby, this theory explains how our early relationships shape how we handle vulnerability in adulthood. If you have a secure attachment style, a betrayal is deeply painful, but your core sense of self remains relatively intact. You recognize that the other person's actions are a reflection of their character, not your worth. However, if you possess an anxious or avoidant attachment style, broken trust can trigger profound psychological trauma. An anxious individual may spiral into severe fear of abandonment, blaming themselves for the breach. An avoidant individual will completely shut down, build emotional walls, and vow never to let anyone close again. For these attachment styles, a broken promise feels like a core threat to their personal safety. The cognitive distortions that follow betrayal. Once your trust is shattered, your mind attempts to protect you from future pain by adopting extreme, automatic thinking patterns known as cognitive distortions. The most common distortion after a betrayal is overgeneralization. Your brain shifts from thinking, "This specific person lied to me," to "Everyone lies, and no one can be trusted." Another major distortion is catastrophizing, where you constantly anticipate the worst possible outcome in every social or romantic interaction. While these mental shortcuts are designed to act as protective shields, they actually trap you in a prison of isolation. By assuming everyone will eventually betray you, your brain keeps you in a perpetual state of defensiveness, preventing you from ever forming genuine, healthy connections again. The psychological anatomy of the offender. Understanding why trust gets broken requires examining the psychology of the person who breaks it. Contrary to popular belief, not all betrayals are born out of malicious intent. Most stem from low emotional intelligence, conflict avoidance, and poor self-regulation. Many offenders suffer from acute psychological compartmentalization, the ability to separate their harmful actions from their self-image as a good person. This allows them to make dishonest choices while convincing themselves that it's not a big deal, or they will never find out, so it won't hurt them. When confronted, offenders often display defensive mechanisms like projection or rationalization to protect their ego from the guilt of having caused harm. Their inability to tolerate discomfort or admit weakness ultimately drives the breach of trust. The silent killer, emotional withdrawal. While dramatic lies make the biggest headlines, the most insidious form of broken trust is emotional withdrawal. This occurs when a partner, friend, or family member silently checks out of the relationship without explicit conflict. They stop sharing their inner world, withhold affection, and offer passive indifference instead of active engagement. Psychologically, emotional withdrawal breaks the unspoken contract of mutual presence. It sends a covert message to your brain. You are no longer worth my vulnerability. This slow, silent erosion of trust creates a unique form of grief known as ambiguous loss. You are grieving the presence of someone who is physically right next to you, but emotionally completely out of reach. Rebuilding broken trust is not an automatic process driven by time alone. It requires a deliberate, structured psychological blueprint. Real reconciliation begins with unconditional accountability from the person who broke the trust. The offender must demonstrate genuine remorse, which means acknowledging the full emotional impact of their actions without offering defensive excuses, deflecting blame, or minimizing the damage. Psychologically, the victim needs to see that the offender fully grasps the weight of the pain they caused. True accountability requires complete transparency and the willing surrender of privacy boundaries for a period, allowing the hurt partner to verify facts and slowly dismantle their hypervigilance. Without total honesty and patience, any attempt at moving forward is merely a temporary patch on a structural failure. Reclaiming your internal locus of control. When trust is destroyed, your sense of agency is shattered along with it. To heal, you must shift your focus from attempting to control the other person's behavior to rebuilding your own internal locus of control. This means accepting that you cannot guarantee someone else will never hurt you again, but you can trust yourself to handle it if they do. Rebuilding self-trust involves setting clear, non-negotiable personal boundaries and honoring them. Start making small daily commitments to yourself, such as sticking to a routine, practicing mindfulness, or speaking up when something feels off, and follow through. As you consistently keep promises to yourself, your brain gradually realizes that your safety comes from your own resilience, not from the unpredictable actions of others. Overcoming hypervigilance and post-betrayal growth. Living in a constant state of suspicion is exhausting and unsustainable. Moving past betrayal requires actively training your nervous system to stand down from red alert. This process involves distinguishing between real red flags in the present moment and emotional triggers lingering from past trauma. When hypervigilance kicks in, practice grounding techniques to anchor yourself in reality rather than spiraling into anxious assumptions. Over time, many individuals experience a psychological phenomenon known as post-betrayal growth. This occurs when processing deep emotional pain leads to greater self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and deeper empathy. You stop viewing yourself purely as a victim of circumstances and start recognizing the immense emotional strength gained through navigating adversity. Learning to trust again. The gradual bridge. Trust should never be restored overnight or granted unconditionally after a major breach. Instead, think of trust as a bank account that requires small, consistent deposits over an extended period. Start by offering low-stakes trust, allowing the person to demonstrate reliability in minor everyday matters before extending deeper emotional vulnerability. If you are entering a new relationship after being betrayed in the past, remember that your new partner is starting with a clean slate. They should not be penalized for the debts of your past experiences. Healthy trust is not about naive optimism or turning a blind eye to potential risks. It is about grounded discernment, keeping your eyes open, observing actions rather than words, and proceeding at a pace that respects your psychological safety. The power of radical acceptance and moving forward. The final stage of healing from broken trust is radical acceptance. Radical acceptance does not mean forgiving the betrayer, forgetting what happened, or condoning the behavior. It means accepting reality exactly as it is without burning mental energy wishing it were different. You stop asking, "How could this happen?" and accept that it did happen. This mental pivot frees up your emotional capacity, allowing you to choose your next step with clarity. Whether you decide to rebuild the relationship on a completely new foundation, or walk away entirely to preserve your peace, radical acceptance transfers power back to you. You are no longer defined by the trust that was broken, but by the conscious, empowered life you build moving forward. This deep dive into the psychology of broken trust helped you understand your own mind or relationships a little better. Please drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel for more evidence-based psychological insights, and leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts or experiences with rebuilding self-trust. Your engagement helps this content reach others who might need to hear it today. Thank you for watching.